Welcome back, folks, to Swiftly Speaking. My name is Paul Hudson, and today I have with me Paola Mata, a senior developer for the New York Times. As always, I've got stacks of questions for her about her job, the work she does in our community, some of her favorite Swift topics, and everyone who's joining us live on YouTube can, of course, ask their own questions, and I'll make sure Paola asks them as best I can and really grill her on those questions. Once again, I'd like to thank my sponsor, who is Bitrise. They make it really easy to do continuous integration and continuous delivery and signing and testing and way more for iOS developers. You can find out more at bitrise.io. Paola, how are you doing?
Hi, I am doing well. It's Friday, so that's something to be celebrating. And yeah, just regular work day. Home with my boyfriend and my little dog, and we're all staying sane.
That's good to hear, because you are an experienced work from homer, right? You've been doing it for a little while.
Yeah, so I went remote when I moved out to Philadelphia. I was in New York, where I grew up, so I was there forever. I moved out here in August, so I had maybe like 6, 7. I can't count. I had a few months of experience before actually having to go remote along with everyone else.
Right, nice. You got ahead of the game a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's helped a lot because I'm already set up, and I just have the experience of like how to work with other people. It's actually more challenging though when everyone else is remote, but I'm managing.
I guess at least it means you are aware of what regular work from home feels like. 'Cause lots of folks right now are working from home for the very first time. They're feeling they're not liking it at all. They're anxious, or stressed out. When actually a lot of that is just the current environment, the current hideous pandemic.
Yeah, I think even for me, having worked remote for months before the pandemic, it's been a little bit of a challenge. Not having all my regular outlets for enjoyment, and even I would actually go into the office voluntarily. I wasn't required to, but I would go once a month to just
Right.
like catch up with everyone and see everyone. And I miss my team definitely. I surprisingly I miss being on a call and with my team, and they're all sitting in the same room interacting, and sort of I felt like I was in there more so than I do now when everyone's separate.
Right. So you are now a senior developer for a massive company, the New York Times, doing amazing work there. And this promotion, I think, happened just last year, if I remember correctly. So you've been doing it for maybe a year or so now. What would you say separates a senior developer from a junior developer?
So I have a lot of thoughts on this actually. I mean,
Great.
obviously every company defines has their career ladder, or maybe some don't, but at least they have some idea of what it takes to be a senior developer. And a lot of I don't think when I was junior, I thought maybe it's just being really fast or just like knowing how to do everything. And I've definitely changed my mind as I've grown as a developer, and obviously working up toward the promotion, and even since then. But would, if I have to answer that question for somebody who is maybe trying to get there, I would say it's putting it simply, it's being able to handle, let's say, a project or a feature from start to finish. So that involves a lot. There's a lot of communications, there's planning, there's obviously the technical know-how for how to approach a problem, architecturally or and otherwise. And also part of it's also breaking down the work. If you're working on managing a role, kind of managing a project, let's say, and you are working with other people, how do you break down that work so to make it easier to tackle simultaneously, as opposed to like being blocked? Just like seeing the project through. And then there are other aspects to it, which probably also around like mentoring and working with other people, which I can speak more to. But I think um, those are the major things that I would say would at least qualify you to say, hey, I should have a senior title at this point if I can do these things.
Yeah. I remember years ago I was delivering a lecture to a university full of wannabe developers. They're going to graduate in a year or so's time and hopefully get jobs doing that. And the lecturer specifically asked me to talk about how much time I spent coding, because I think in their heads the answer was 8 hours a day. Sit
Yeah.
down, Xcode open, brrr, out comes Swift, 8 hours, close Xcode, go home kind of thing. And it really isn't like that, right? Because all the things you mentioned, only like one, breaking things down was really specifically about the actual practical application of writing the code for this. Everything else, planning the stuff, building the bigger picture, is not necessarily code related.
Exactly. I think the code is the fun part, but I enjoy a lot of the process, even like contributing to what a feature is going to look like. So when we're planning something, I'm sort of the technical go-to person for a specific project. Even now, we're planning on kind of following up on a project that was launched last year that I worked on. I have my designer come to me and ask me like, hey, how is this feasible? Is this even possible? Would this be more work versus that? And just sort of that to keep in mind what actually the feature is going to be.
Right. So when it comes to the sort of day-to-day role of being a senior developer, what would you say the fundamental skills, the core skills of a senior developer, what do you think they ought to be?
Well, there's definitely the technical know-how, which I think is something you gain from experience, which I was thinking earlier, like somebody being like 6 months into this and getting a senior title to me kind of doesn't make sense, because I don't think enough time has passed to like learn from your mistakes and sort of see some of those play out. And I was like, oh, maybe I should have written this differently. And learn from the mistakes of others as well, and learn from your team. So that definitely takes time and experience. But I think communication is really important, like working well with others, knowing how to like make trade-offs between should I make this like a super complicated feature kind of, or should I like having a good sense of like the product versus like the code, and kind of like having a good middle ground for like what's important, how to write code that like your team can understand, can read, and can extend as needed. So I don't know if I'm answering the question. So there's the technical part, the communication part. There's a lot like managing different aspects of a project, I'd say.
Right. There's a question here from Prathamesh Kawakar. And this might be specifically about the New York Times or more generally in your eyes. Is there a middle intermediate developer level in between junior and senior? Or is it like junior, some time goes by, some experience gained or some skills acquired, bang, you're now senior?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, it's interesting because I was actually hired as like at a time I was at BuzzFeed before the Times for 4 years, and I would never actually hired with a junior title, but I was more or less a junior. And then they sort of changed their career ladders, and the titles changed, and we switched to software engineer. So now it's similar to what we have at the Times, where it's associate engineer, more or less what you would think of as a junior. Then there's just like software engineer, which is the mid-level, where you could stay for a few years, maybe like 3, 5. It took me about 3 to 5 years, I'd say. And then senior, and then there are more levels where you can continue to grow, either as a individual contributor, so a programmer person who's pushing code, or into management.
Right. So when you think about your actual day-to-day jobs, the actual things you would do in a day, coding obviously is a part of it, as you said, but you also mentioned planning, training, architecture, and more. Are you also interfacing with the business side of things, maybe marketing, maybe product, maybe design, commercials, or leaving that to other folks?
So it really depends on the project. If I'm writing, like, let's say something ad related, or something that's related, maybe a test that we're going to run with the marketing team to push some kind of alert, then I might be working with them more closely. The business side, probably less so. I do interact a lot with our sort of data engineers, so the people who analyze all the analytics that we gather, and I'm working with them a lot lately, actually, because I'm working on implementing a new analytics framework that we're using across the company now.
Nice.
Who else might I interact with? Just other teams as well. We do have, at the Times, we have this what's called an app platforms team, and they work on a lot of the shared libraries that we use across apps, because we have, at least right now, we have 3 different iOS apps. So we have the newsreader, we have crosswords, and cooking, which is the team I work on, which are very different apps, but we can still take advantage of libraries and tools as well.
Right. There's a question here from Robert J. Clegg. Some companies move developers from junior to senior based on years worked in the profession. Do you feel that's a correct approach?
So I think it can be used as a general guideline, but even like, as I said, 3 to 5, that's kind of a big range. It just sort of, I think it depends, honestly. Some people move faster than others. Everyone has their path. It also depends on like the opportunities that you're given to really show your skills. Um, that doesn't always happen. Maybe other folks on your team are getting those like more visible big projects. But I think that's one of the main ways that you can really show your skills is like taking on something that's like, you have more ownership of it. And like, if it's pretty high visibility, like a major feature that's going to like really show off your skills and show what you can do.
Right. So also in your team, presumably, or wider in the company, there are folks more junior to you who are junior developers or associate, whatever you might call them, by team. And we have a question here from Pawan Kumar. How do you do code review being a senior developer? So more broadly, what approach do you take towards reviewing someone else's code?
So my approach to reviewing code hasn't changed much since I started. So ever since I started as a junior engineer, I was always reviewing code. It was more I was learning a lot more as I went. So I had a lot more questions, or sometimes things would go over my head and I would kind of ask for an explanation. I think now that I'm thinking about how my team is writing code, I'm thinking more of like the bigger picture. How is this going to be? How is this going to work long term? Like, is this something that is going to introduce any potentially technical debt or unnecessary complexity into the app, or is anything unclear? Naming, surprisingly, sometimes naming is just terrible. And I have to make a comment on it. Like, I'm not sure what this function does. Please make it more clear. So things like that, adding good comments, maybe when something is a little bit too complex, whatever's going to make not just my life, but my team's life easier, and whoever takes over the code when I'm on a different team, that's what I'm thinking about when I'm doing code review.
Right. But would you say it's not just the short term of let's make this code the best we can, but also as a senior developer, you're also looking at the long term growth of those around you as well, helping them get better at naming things, get better at architecting things, and think in a bigger picture as well?
Yeah. So actually, a good example is the team that I'm currently on. When I came on, I was mid-level, like just software engineer. We hired an associate, and then the other teammate was senior. So you have a little bit at the different levels. We're all expected to do code review and contribute to, and sometimes like even the questions that a junior might ask might be really beneficial to make me rethink with the way I wrote something.
Yes.
To maybe like break it down, make it more clear. So anybody can contribute at any level. I think definitely I would say I'm more confident at this point and more opinionated. And when I think something is just like is not going to work or just like looks too messy or hacky, I will point it out.
I love questions from junior developers, or obviously anyone, but junior developers particularly ask questions that kind of catch me out a little bit, because they force me to think exactly how things work and how to phrase them in a way that can be understood at whatever level they are at. And I enjoy that, it makes me really make sure I can explain what I've just done in a simpler way, and in a way that really outlines what I'd considered, what I'd rejected, alternatives that didn't quite work out, whatever along the way, in a way that makes sense to people. And that's actually quite hard to do. It's a skill you kind of learn.
Yeah. Speaking of which, it's actually something that I had to think about when you're writing any documentation, or like, for example, like the chapter that I wrote for the Swift for Good book, where I was really going back to like just the very basics of enum and trying to break them down, and break them down for somebody who like has maybe never seen them or doesn't know how to use them yet. So there's a lot of thinking that goes into like writing good documentation as well.
Yeah. In fact, just Monday, I was doing a video for UIConf with my daughter Sophie, and afterwards we were interviewed live by Glenna, who was emceeing UIConf that day, and she asked Sophie, what was the hardest thing about learning Swift, and she said, "Oh, it was optionals." And I said, "Well, optionals for Sophie, but a lot of folks struggle with closures." And she turns to me on the camera and says, what are closures? I'm like, I can't explain to you on a live stream what closures are. We can go over this later on, but it's not, feasibly possible to do in a live stream to explain closures to somebody, because it is complex. You've got to sort of order your thoughts a little bit and then convey them in a sensible way. So if someone right now is junior or intermediate and they're keen to advance, they want to take that next step in their career to become a senior developer, what advice do you have for someone who aims to get there?
I mean, first of all, I would say definitely ask your manager or whoever the person would be to speak to about what is in the existing career ladder, if there is one, or if not, what would really get them there, what they're looking for. And beyond that, I would say it's like I mentioned before, maybe getting on, trying to tackle some bigger projects. To keep challenging yourself, because it's really the only way you're going to grow and learn new things, even if it's scary at first. I still get scared. When I started at the Times, actually, I was given a project to update a library and then all the related code that I had never used before. This concept of promises, and so I had to learn it while updating it. And I just I took it as I'm scared, but I know I can figure this out. And I think that's the attitude you need to have when you're trying to grow as an engineer, develop new skills. So finding out what the steps are, what the requirements are for promotion at your company, and definitely taking ownership of think of a visible, a feature that a lot of people are going to use, and if there's that kind of project available, definitely work on something like that. And then, kind of keep track of all these things that you're working on. So come review time, you can really point to everything you've contributed to.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think your advice to keep challenging yourself is huge. And as you say, it's scary. Keep on leaving your comfort zone, step by step by step. Try something new. Just try something out. I'm gonna try the coordinator pattern. I've never used it before. That's my project tomorrow. Or I'm gonna try MVVM or MVP, or you name architecture thing you want to try out. Just try it out. See where it gets you. See for yourself what the pros and cons are. Give yourself a challenge. Can I do this thing? And then see where it gets you. And keeping track, you're absolutely right. It's an amazing thing because we don't do it, do we? Because we're in this often like a scrum cycle, 2 weekly sprints, and we're thinking about what's next. We're not pausing to reflect on where we've come from, where we've been, and what we've learned, and how that reflects on us in the future.
Exactly. I forget about projects I worked on a month ago. I have to go back and look at the code, or look at we use Jira, so I have to look at the tickets. What exactly happened here? And to kind of refresh my memory. But it's really useful come review time. Just to even have a Google Doc sort of with a list of the major projects you've worked on. If you can, maybe discuss with your manager maybe quarterly, so that you're on top of it. Check in to see how you're progressing with your goals. Also, having written goals helps a lot. We try to establish them at the Times. I think it's every 6 months. So we have our different, there's a whole outline, but we have different types of goals that we aim for. And on top of that, you can have your own personal goals that are not necessarily related to the company, but there might be something you want to learn. Maybe you want to learn this quarter or this half or this year, and making sure you stay on top of those as well.
Yeah. So there's a very common question here from Dennis B. Do you think a degree in computer science is necessary to get a good job as an iOS developer?
So my answer is no. I do not have a degree in computer science. I have a degree in English literature, which is very unrelated.
Represent.
But somehow, yeah, I love being an English major. I love books, so that was great. I did, however, get exposed to programming when I was in high school. So I knew something about it, some of the basic ideas. When I had to relearn it, it felt like I was starting from fresh. But I think or this is my guess, or not my guess, my assumption maybe. I think people who have a CS degree have a bit of an easier time picking up certain concepts seems like it happens a little faster, like switching platforms or switching, you know, ideas. But I think it's not. I think it's not required. I've worked with a lot of people who are my entire team right now. It does not come from a CS degree. Like they're either business or chemistry or something else. So it's definitely not required. If you're in the position where you're really interested in learning, like if you're in school, is what I'm saying, and you can go that route, there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, I'd encourage it if you're interested in doing it, but I don't think if you already have a degree, I don't think it's necessary to go back and get it unless you absolutely want to.
I think that's a fairly massive statement of fact there. Your entire team, the team you work with right now at the New York Times, a massive media company, all come from diverse backgrounds. They don't have traditional computing science, laser-focused coder background. That alone really answers the question in a startling way.
Yeah. And also I've worked with a number of organizations in New York specifically that are training, or, these training programs for like boot camps, I guess we're calling them still, for people who come from different backgrounds and want to just like learn specifically iOS development as opposed to like computer science. I do think it helps to maybe on your own learn some of those like data structures and algorithms because they come up in interviews, and it does help you to understand, get a deeper understanding of what you're doing. But you can accomplish that by studying, by reading on your own, versus having to go back and get a 4-year degree.
Well, you are spoilt for choice around there for boot camps because you have folks like Pursuit who do astonishing work. Anyway, we've got a question here from Monica Pandy, who, by the way, runs a wonderful blog, monicascompilation.com, about iOS stuff. It's quite new. Check it out. She asks, do you frequently allocate time to refactor code, or do you prefer to write the code once, the first time, just write?
Well, if it's my personal project, I might take the time. But when I'm at work, we have assigned sprint work, and I have to work on the assigned projects by the end of the sprint. If I have an idea that something should be refactored because it'll actually result in an improvement, make it easier to work, make this feature better or safer, I might suggest it and to my manager or whoever handles the sprints, and say like, hey, we should take out time for this. But I tend not, as I'm like maybe building something out, I might like, hey, like I think it works a little bit better this way and rewrite it a little bit. But I don't necessarily go back unless there's a need to.
Well, that sort of sets for another question in my mind straight away, because one of the hardest things most of us find to do is to estimate how long it takes to do some work. I think Jesse Squires a year or two ago had the brilliant idea of using Celsius to Fahrenheit temperature conversion as, guessing Celsius and predicting Fahrenheit, because that's basically as accurate as anybody, quite frankly. We don't really know. And some folks use planning poker or similar. Are you good at estimating time, do you think? It sounds like you're pretty good at getting your code right the first time, so presumably you do take a good idea of where you want to go and get there eventually.
Yeah, I think it's just practice. I think I was doing it when I was back at BuzzFeed and I was still like relatively junior. I think I'm just fairly good, and it's a skill on its own. Like knowing how to break down work and like assign points to it. Obviously, these are just estimates. Like no one actually expects them. There isn't like an hour time that's assigned to like 2 story points or 3 story points. But I try to think of it as like kind of bigger picture. Is this going to take a day? Is this going to take 2 or 3 days? Is this going to take a week, 2 weeks? That's how I tend to think of things and not get super caught up on like being very specific.
Yes. We have a question here again from Prathamash Kawaka, who asks, what would you say the responsibilities of a senior dev are when it comes to onboarding a junior developer?
So I think mentorship is a really important part, and it's expected. I think if you're a senior, at least it is the companies where I've worked, that you have had some mentorship experience. I think as far as onboarding, I think it's something that ideally the entire team is contributing to. Even someone junior who comes in and says, "Hey, like this particular piece was like hard to understand," they're helping shape what the onboarding will look like for the next person.
Mm.
I think I think everyone should help onboard someone new. But as far as being a senior, maybe if it's been discussed with your manager before that you're going to be like informally, like basically mentoring, supervising somebody, then yeah, it's definitely your responsibility to do so. Yeah, are there any specific questions related to that?
Possibly, but we can move on though. Certainly, what I like about onboarding folks is that it highlights again in my head all the ugly corner cases in our build setup or whatever it is we're using that you just kind of take for granted after 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. Oh yeah, that script fails every other time or whatever it is, or that machine has to be rebooted twice a week, whatever happens to be, right? Things you sort of get used to over the years you were there, perhaps. Whereas someone new comes in, they say, why does that machine catch fire at 2 o'clock every day? And you're like, oh, guess whatever it is, and it just brings it back to light again. These things you sort of live with. So
absolutely,
what do you think comes after senior developer, and what do you think it takes to get there from senior developer?
So this is sort of where I am now, where I'm deciding, do I want to go down the path of like considering management, or do I want to continue as more of like an individual contributor? And the next role there would be lead engineer, lead for my team, tech lead, whatever it's called. And that involves what I'm understanding, what I'm gathering from like our documentation and having spoken to a lot more people. It has to do with making, so the amount of impact you make, not just on your team, but like across the org. And so it involves a lot more like collaborating with other teams, maybe learning a little bit more about, like, for example, like our platforms team, our shared libraries, our build system, and like contributing to those in some way. Again, obviously, there's some sort of mentorship supervising going on there with the more junior devs. But I worked with a lead who was mid-level and who was leading more senior devs. So that's absolutely possible. So yeah, I think for me, what I'm thinking is making more impact and making sure that I'm doing a good amount of mentorship.
Okay. And one last one about being a senior developer before we move on to the next topic. How would you say a senior developer can keep learning, can keep growing and getting out of that comfort zone regularly?
So in addition to taking on larger projects, maybe just taking an interest in a particular aspect of like Swift or iOS and, learning on your own, taking advantage of any time that your company allots for learning, basically. Some companies do like a 7% time or have like a hack week or something to really explore something outside even the iOS realm. I think it really helps to understand a lot about like how APIs work, because we use them so often in iOS. And so there's obviously like, listening to really cool podcasts or YouTube channels or blog posts. There, all the same resources that you use to like learn iOS, you can continue using them for more advanced topics. Maybe if you're the kind of person who likes having side projects, you could use an opportunity like that to explore maybe a framework that you don't get to use in your day-to-day job. There are so many ways to learn, and you could also like maybe take an interest in another programming language and another platform entirely and pursue that.
Absolutely. I'm seeing even more questions come in now about being a senior developer. Folks clearly like this topic an awful lot. Let's just do one more, a sneaky one stuck in here from Raj Raval. How would you approach a junior developer if they've written suboptimal code? How would you tackle that? How would you help them improve that code and hopefully improve as a developer as well?
So let's assuming like I saw this in a code review or something. I sometimes code review isn't the best way to convey information. So I might say like, let's meet briefly to discuss this, or like in a non-intimidating way. Or let's like jump on a call if now that I'm remote. I think also being available for questions while they're, just like saying, hey, if you need any help, just like let me know, is also like being unintimidating, I would say. But yeah, I think having had, I've run into this experience where like, I gave someone an idea for how to implement something, and then the way they implemented it wasn't quite what I was thinking. I just like very, very nicely said, hey, I think if you do it this way, it would be a little bit, it'd be better, or it'd be cleaner, or whatever the issue was. And, usually juniors are very grateful for this kind of feedback. I think a lot of the problems that I've seen junior developers, people who are learning on their own, have are related to just not having enough feedback on their code. So I try to give as much as I can. I would never let something pass that was, it's going into a shared code base. Like I don't want anything that hasn't been thought through enough. So just like offer myself for questions and for, give ample feedback.
Yeah. Okay, let's go ahead and park the senior developer topic, even though there are still more questions coming in. Let's move on to another topic, because when I asked you about how can a senior developer keep growing and growing, you said, pick a Swift topic and go deep into that. And recently you added a chapter to the book, Swift for Good, and you focused very much on enums. So in my head, I'm thinking, wow, Paola must really love enums. So let's jump onto enums instead. Could you tell us what you think makes Swift enums just so powerful?
To me, it's really the flexibility. You can use them in a really simple case to to define some values, some simple values, integers, whatever. But you can also use them use them anywhere for networking reasons, for analytics. Like there's just like a myriad of ways they can be used. And whether in a simple form or the complex, using associated types. And also what I really like about enums is the safety feature of being able to switch when you have like the predefined values, and making sure you're implementing or accounting for each case.
Yeah. So when it comes to folks making a choice, you've got to choose between enum and a struct. When would you say, yeah, this is definitely a case for an enum, and when not so much?
Specifically, when you have like a list of like predefined values that you want to group under a single type. An enum is a struct would have like more properties, a little bit more open, but yeah, so I'm thinking like more real world examples. Like we have the concept of an item in my code base that's collectible. So you can collect recipes, or you can collect collections. So we might have an enum for like anything that can be collectible, and some of them have associated values, some of them don't. Also, something like for handling error handling or something like that, different potential errors that you could receive.
Yeah, certainly one pattern I've seen quite a lot is when I do the same thing in my own code. When I think about some values or some functions that I want to put somewhere grouped, like some static stuff, and they could totally go in a struct, but increasingly folks are putting them in enums instead, with the underlying knowledge that you cannot instantiate the enum. You could make one of these structs, but you shouldn't make one of these structs. They're not designed to be made. They're designed to be consumed and used somehow. And enums can do exactly the same purpose. You can give them constants, you can give them methods, you can give them whatever you want to, make them generic if you really want to, but you can't then create an instance of that enum. It isn't possible.
Yeah, that's, again, one of the really great safety features that we have. I think, I forgot what I was going to say.
I'm sure it's great.
Sorry.
There's no pressure. These people can wait. It's fine. They can all wait.
Forever. We have all day.
Well, there's a question here from Prathamesh Kawaka, and this is a complex one because it's back to that idea of can you explain something complicated in a fairly easy way? And Prathamesh asks, how would you explain enums with associated values to someone who's never come across that concept before?
I honestly, I'd probably try to use the example that I just used with the collections, the types of collections that you can have. There are some cases where just having the raw value isn't enough. You might want some more information. For example, if one of the cases is a recipe, I might want the recipe itself. I might want to like be able to pull out from the enum case like this value that's associated with that type. I don't know if that makes sense, but it just allows us to attach more information to a specific case within that type.
Austin Conlon
And
asks.
you can,
Go ahead. Go ahead, please.
I thought what I was going to say before is that you can actually use a struct value as an associated, a struct type that you've defined as an associated value.
Austin Conlon asks, what do you think are good use cases for enum raw values?
Well, I will often use very simple ones like strings. It's safer than having to, use what are they called? Magic? Or
Magic numbers.
Just free floating. Yeah, magic numbers or like just strings all over your code that, you could get wrong. You could mistype and then it just throws everything off. Or I use for like associated values, like any classes that I've defined specifically, some of my model classes. I tend to use one. Sometimes you can use, have a tuple, have like multiple associated values. You can do that. Or if you can somehow use a value that's just related to your initial associated value, that makes things a little easier as far as comparison.
Yeah, there are lots of reasons I use raw values. I'm not sure why, but one particular one just sprung into my head. Like when I'm doing sprite kit collisions, you want to use doubling of values for your raw values. So 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, and so forth. So you can add them together to see what collided. And you just want to be able to say, collision types dot building dot raw value and get out 32. So as you say, it avoids that magic number of 32 being stuck in your code. It's all is the number behind the scenes, but it lets you refer to it in a more understandable way. Let's move on and think about places where enums are great fits for stuff. Now, if you were to think about 2 or 3 places where enums you think should get more use, where they are really, really applicable to our code and great ideas to fit into there, where would you say they are? And also, where are the wrong places?
Yeah, so I think what I mentioned before, basically like to avoid having to type in, if you're using an enum with a string value, you're avoiding having to write any strings out every single time you call them. When you're trying to be, for example, if there are only there's a set predefined endpoints that you have that you call by a different name. Maybe it's like this is the feed and this is whatever the endpoint is. When you're trying to be safe and make sure that you don't end up using unintended or just like incorrect values anywhere.
So would you actually use enums for actual feed information? Like this is the URL to one feed, here's the URL to another feed as enums, or is that just sort of other kinds of values you'd use?
Maybe not the enums, I might add some variables or some functions to get information based on that enum case.
Yeah, and actually we've seen Swift evolve enums quite a lot over the years. In particular, Swift 4.2 added Robert's case iterable code. We have comparable enums landing in Swift 5.3, which as we speak is a month away from entering beta when WWDC starts. And they're wonderful features to have that really power up enums and make them more useful going forward. Are there still things you think enums are lacking in Swift and that should be added in future versions?
I honestly cannot think of any, but I will say that whenever something new like case iterable comes along, I think like, oh, like I've been doing that on my own this whole time, and having to hack that myself instead of like having it available to me in a very nice like protocol, let's say. Maybe just like more protocols. I can't think of a specific one. Adherence to like some protocols that would I can't think of anything honestly, but I'm sure that once someone thinks of it, I will absolutely use it.
Yeah, you're like, aha, that's so obvious. I want that straight away.
Yeah, yeah, it's just like it's kind of obvious. Something I learned about more recently is using fall through so that you go through each enum case and take some action. I for some reason my I don't know if it's like my what do you call it, Swiftland keeps giving me an error whenever I do that. But so something like that, case iterable versus versus a fall through, which allows us to do more flexibility, gives us more power with enums would be awesome.
Yeah. Certainly, one thing I value is when you are able to take code you've been using a long time and think, actually, this is really usable code that anyone could use. And Suresh Kandu gave a wonderful talk about this. He delivered it a number of times, but I saw it in Pragma in Italy 3 years ago, maybe, called "You Deserve Nice Things," and it was basically walking through some of his code library of stuff. Here's how to do this, how to do this, da, 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 da. And it's simple methods that make Swift collections nicer to use, for example, or whatever sequences or arrays that you're working with, nicer to use. And things like all satisfy, I first saw it there in his code way before Swift put it into 4.2. Things like count where, which it was in his talk, I believe, and then he put it into Evolution. It didn't quite make it through for compiler reasons, but it's been accepted and ready to go in the future. And it's a simple thing like count how many items have this property. And of course you can do a filter and a count, but it's more efficient to go in one run. So little things that make your life easier, you've been using in your code for a long time to do case iterable or whatever it was in your case, that everyone else can use, is I think the genesis of many, many good or great Swift evolution ideas.
We actually I sorry.
Go ahead.
So
No, go ahead.
I tried to look over any the currently proposed Swift evolution for specifically for enums, and I didn't see many, so that's disappointing. But I think there might have been one or two. I don't know if you're aware of them.
Yeah, so comparable enum conformance is in
Right.
5.3, and that's a pretty nice one.
Yeah.
I think they're talking about making Frozen available to user code, because Frozen is available to Swift internal code, their own APIs, but not to us yet. That's possible. That's going to be 5.4, 5.5. Who knows what in the future? We'll find out. I'll take one last Swift question before we move on. There's a question here from William Spanfelner, who's doing very well, by the way, in the 100 days of code. He's, I think, day 550 right now. He's doing amazing work. William asks, what new Swift API would you most like to incorporate into your work at New York Times? So if they said, right, forget iOS 11, forget iOS 12, you can do iOS 13 all the way, baby, do it. What would you get? That's it. I'm day one onto this API.
Wow. So something I'm thinking about now for a project that I'm working on is using what is it? My mind goes blank sometimes, but the diffable data sources.
Oh yeah, Bruno's work, great work.
I haven't used it yet, and I think it'd be great because I'm running into a situation with where we have a list we're thinking a lot about making it editable, and I think I've been told that it would be a really good use case for it, and I kind of it can kind of suck not being able to dive right into these things because I do have to support older versions, but I do keep an eye out for like where can I like make a case for using this new API or using this new feature of Swift.
Yeah, it's a wonderful feature, and the example they give, I think actually on the Dub stage, was re-implementing the Wi-Fi finder in iOS, where you sort of see a few Wi-Fi things, your local hotspot, and new ones sort of slide in and then go away again as it loses contact with the old ones, whatever. And it's constantly changing the list. New ones animate in and move around and go away again. And that kind of thing is difficult to do because you want to animate it nicely. You want the list to move up slightly and then reorder and insert here. And, of course, you can just call reload data, but we don't want to do that. We want to make it nice and beautiful. And
Yeah.
different data sources do that for you. You just say, here's my old data,
Right.
here's a new one, figure out the differences, please, and apply the snapshot. And boom, it will reorder them animated live on the thing. It just looks absolutely fantastic. So that's a good choice.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm excited to get into it.
Okay, let's park Swift and talk about your work in the Swift community, in the iOS community, the broader work you do. Because lots of folks are keen to get involved as well. So how would you say someone could get started being involved in the community?
So there are multiple ways. I think if you're somebody who really wants to like contribute to open source projects, that's one way to probably like get to know different people and even start working with them with it. But I think I have taken the route of being more involved in the community specifically, like in person, with the organizing several meetups since even before I started in tech. Actually, I started organizing communities. So another way that I've tried different things because I just kind of see what sticks, like what I like the most. I've given talks at meetups. I've given talks at like conferences. I think that's like it can be pretty intimidating if it's something you haven't done before. But even just like showing up to a more casual event. Sometimes there are more networking based events versus like a very technical talks, but sometimes maybe the more technical talk events could be less intimidating because you're all learning something you don't know, and it's a good opportunity to talk about whatever was presented. Makes it a little bit easier, and there is some time for pizza and whatever folks have at meetup events. Yeah, so there's a few different avenues you can take. I definitely recommend getting involved in the community either way. Another thing that has really worked for me, if you're like more of a social media person, I got to know so many people just using Twitter. So many people that I then went to DubDub and like met them in person, and it was like we were instant friends. Yeah. So it's really great because you get to talk about share not just Swift questions, but also get a little insight into their personal lives, which is it's kind of nice to actually feel like you're not talking to a bot, but you're talking to a human who also struggles sometimes and who has like you can celebrate like their accomplishments as well.
Right. And you've been to a variety of events because you've obviously been to DubDub and you've been to Try Swift. You ran your own meetup, we still do, Women in iOS. Well,
Yeah.
I guess it's paused temporarily because of the pandemic, but
we are not paused. We have actually had, I think, at least 2 events since the pandemic shut down, whatever.
Virtual
we just
events?
had them on Zoom.
Okay,
Yeah,
fine.
yeah.
That's the key. Okay, fine. Great.
So Women in iOS. Sorry, it came out of another larger iOS meetup in New York called. Oh my God, I'm going blank.
I know what it is. I'm not going to
IOSoho.
say it. I don't know how to say it. So how do you actually say it?
I say IOSoho.
IOSoho. Okay, I always thought it was like iOS Soho or something. I don't know what it actually is. So I'm glad you said it first. There we go.
Yeah, it's interesting because even the organizers will sometimes say it differently.
Okay.
But Soho is the neighborhood, and it used to be based in Soho, the event before it moved to a different space. So that's why I always called it IOSoho, and it does sound a little weird, but whatever. So it came out
do you
of
find
that.
the benefits to you were different going to those 2 different kinds of events? One more focused on women and one open to everyone?
Yeah. So I didn't always feel super confident being able to speak, especially on the technical topic, because I would give a lot of talks about my background and like how to get into tech, which I knew about, or how to be a woman in tech, or I don't do those as much anymore. So now I feel a little bit more confident giving like technical talks. So they require a lot of preparation. I still get nervous, but it was a little bit easier starting out to go to these smaller meetups where I felt a little bit safer. And so the Women in iOS meetup used to also allow anyone to attend. So, but in general, it was a bit smaller. It was just like all the presenters were women.
Right.
So I gave a few talks at that event, which was at that meetup, which was maybe like at most like 75 people versus the iOS meetup, which was more than twice that amount sometimes. So yeah, it's it's intimidating, and I think we had a lot more juniors in the group, so I felt like I was sharing, my knowledge as opposed to having to really like impress like very, very senior folks. So yeah, and also the community. It's good to be. It's one of those things like you don't realize you need it until you have it. In this case, like having other women who have a similar experience, you will really appreciate it once you're there.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a question here from Robert J. Clegg, who asks, what would you recommend to someone who wants to get more involved in the community but can't travel to most popular meetups?
Probably, connecting with some of like the groups that are online. Something like Code Newbies. They have their regular like Q&A events. I think they happen on Mondays. It's just like an online Twitter storm Q&A featuring somebody new. Maybe depending on whether you can, by larger events, is it like meetups or is it conferences? I'm not sure. But yeah, I can see like not everyone is in like a major city that's going to have its own like dedicated meetup group. But like I said, like I've met a lot of people online using Twitter. There might be other groups that are available. Like there might be some Slack groups that you could belong to. Maybe just like somehow finding a small group in your area. I've had the experience of like just starting a meetup several times and seeing like who shows up. Maybe start your own. Maybe you might. It's a very good chance that there are other folks who might be interested in having a community, even if it is small. It doesn't have to be this enormous group.
Yeah, it honestly, having a small meetup, even 4 or 5 people, hanging out, chatting about stuff, can work wonders. Ash Furrow actually started this in New York, and the name's left my head. Is it Labs? He called it. I went to one in Amsterdam. Peer Labs. It's called Peer Labs. And it's lovely. I went to one in Amsterdam, and it's basically, we'll be in this coffee shop from 10 a.m. till noon. Bring your laptop, do some coding together, hang out, chat, ask questions if you want to. There's no like formal presentation. There's no free pizza and all those nice perks perhaps, but it's still a chance to meet like-minded folks in a low-stress environment where you do the same thing you would have done anyway, quite frankly. Just tap away your code for a while. But you can ask questions, you can chat, you can network, and it's a lovely, fun, easy way, I think, to get started.
Yeah. I am one of those people who prefers, like, I prefer smaller, like one-to-one, a couple of people conversations than trying to speak to a large group. So like that works a lot for me. And it was very similar to the first group I started where maybe 3-4 people would show up and we just like have coffee, and I loved it. I got a lot out of it. It's a lot, you feel a lot safer, I think, to ask your questions or to share like, hey, like I find this really hard, or share code. You can do some pairing. All it takes is a couple of people.
Yeah, honestly, it takes a lot of bravery sometimes to ask questions, because you're thinking to yourself, wow, this is a stupid question. I'm a stupid person, whatever it is you're thinking in your head. And it takes a lot of guts to get out there and say, this is what I'm thinking, where am I going wrong? And hopefully folks will very gently, very kindly guide you to where you need to be. But sometimes that isn't that way, and that's where the fear comes from. I'm putting this onto Twitter or Slack or where it happens to be, and you don't feel safe doing that. Like Stack Overflow, for example, is a pretty vicious place. Let's put it that way. Sometimes I don't ask questions there very often because I don't like it. I think the environment is hostile to people. So yes, finding a small group that you can trust to respect you and trust you and walk through problems in a nice, friendly, welcoming way is it's an amazing place. It seems though, Paola, you've opened a can of worms here. Got a follow-on questions. It's getting serious now. Robert J. Clegg asks again, what tips do you have for starting your own iOS or Swift meetup?
Okay, so I would say I used meetup.com when I first started out. There was a small fee that I had to pay. I don't know how much that's changed, but I would say maybe start there because you get a lot more visibility. When anybody looks up the topics that your meetup is based on, they'll find it right away. So I could suggest that. I would say just do it. Like just start an event, see who shows up. It's hard at first, but I think if you're able to share it through the right venues, get your friends to share it, whatever, it'll grow eventually. And the goal isn't necessarily to get like 50 people to show up. Sometimes it could just be like a few, and that's how it starts, and you spread the word from there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think I think one of my AirPods might be going. Yeah, like it's just a matter of like just doing it and seeing what happens. As it starts to grow, I think you can, make changes, maybe get a co-organizer, maybe like get a better sense of what the community needs and try to, kind of tailor the group to a different format, or whatever it is that works best for the group. But it's been, for me, in my experience, a lot of trial and error and being open to new ideas, especially from the members.
Yeah. So we've talked about folks who are too far away from big cities and they can't travel to get there for their meetups or conferences. But another side of this is folks who do live near a conference or meetup, but don't feel comfortable, they feel too introverted, they feel shy, and they don't want to go to those meetups. So what advice do you have for folks who would like to go to a meetup, but they're feeling that horrible shyness, I'll be by myself, I won't know anybody, introverted feeling? Have you any encouragement or advice to help folks just put a foot out there and see where it gets them?
I've heard that from a few people. Some people just don't like these kind of events because they're just larger. That it can be challenging if you have someone from maybe your team or your company who's willing to go with you, and somebody that you trust, and just check it out. Like maybe try that. I always find it easier to, like I was saying, approach one person as opposed to approaching a group if you want to ask questions or just like get to know someone. I don't know beyond that. Like, I think I consider myself pretty introverted. I don't love necessarily going to groups. So I sometimes go to more, like you were mentioning, Paul, some more casual events where I'm not expected to be super technical or anything like that. That might be a little bit easier to as opposed to like the bigger technical talk kind of events. It's hard. I can't imagine that, like, for someone who's super shy, like it would be easy to go to an event like that. Maybe just like start small by like getting to know someone on your team, someone at your company, and seeing if you want to go to something like that together.
It's such a simple suggestion, but I think it really works. They basically act as backup for you. If you need to get out soon, this isn't comfortable, isn't working out for me, someone to talk to, so you aren't sort of standing by yourself when you're trying to mingle. Someone anywhere makes things comfortable. Like if you're going to a random city for travel, you can do that. Of course you can. Going with somebody else gives you an extra bravery to explore more, to see more, to try more, because you're sharing it with somebody else, and it makes a big, big difference. One thing I would add, folks, is that if you are sitting there thinking, I'm just too shy to go to conferences or too shy to go to meetups, that's okay. Like going to meetups and going to events is not a requirement of our profession in any way whatsoever. I think they're nice to go to. I enjoy going there. I meet a lot of my friends. I meet Paola there, for example. But they're not required. And if you don't want to go to them, you don't have to go to them. Don't force yourself to go into these uncomfortable environments unless you actually desperately need to get a job via networking or similar. There's a question here from Vishu Singh, who has a question. Do we build up our presence online before we create a meetup? So this comes down to promotion ultimately. How can we get the word out about women in iOS or whatever meetup they choose to start? How can you get the word out to folks if you haven't got much of an online presence to start with?
Wow. Maybe find, like, for example, there's a co-working space that I go to in the area. I would maybe share it with them and ask them to distribute it through their network. So just like anyone I know, and it doesn't have to be someone who is specifically an iOS engineer. It can be someone who lives in this area and like maybe knows a good amount of people. Is like someone who has connections. Like find those people, have them share it for you. Just kind of spread the word to everyone you know, and maybe they might have ideas for somebody who might find it beneficial. And definitely make use of, as far as like online presence, I don't think besides like my Twitter, I have like my website. I don't have like this, I'm not all over the place. I think maybe I am now with like all the events that I've been to. But starting out, I certainly wasn't. And surprisingly, people just showed up because I was just the description of the event, of the meetup and what we wanted to do appealed to people. So yeah, that's what I can think of.
Okay. And you obviously run the meetups. Do you still have time to speak at meetups or, do other things, or is your time mostly down to meetup admin, like literally running the thing over? Because one of the things I was surprised by when I run my own conference was I didn't get to see many talks. I was busy thinking, is the food ready? Is the Wi-Fi working correctly? Are the drinks in the fridge or whatever it is? I'm doing everything that is not actually sitting down and enjoying talks. Do you get to still do some hands-on meetup stuff, or are you thinking about actual day-to-day organizing most of the time?
So I do still speak at some events. I'm actually speaking at one next week for Latinas in Tech. I'm going to be on a panel talking about working as a remote engineer. So I do still have time. I make time for it. I find it's important to me. It's not something, like you said, it's not required. But as far as organizing, I think anytime you're host, you're a little bit more concerned with like making sure everyone's comfortable and making sure like the drinks don't run out and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But there are, I think what's really great, and something I've mentioned in the past, is that as an organizer, usually when you attend an event, it's on you to approach other people. But when you're the organizer, people just seem to kind of flock to you, looking to you for answers and for like, they want to know who you are. And so you're sort of an authority on this group. And so you get a lot more people approaching you, which as an introvert, it can be a little bit easier, surprisingly.
I think certainly when folks do it to me, and I actually encourage it. I say to folks, come and talk to me at conferences, come and talk to me at meetups. I want to talk to you. I want to see your code. I want to see what's cool for you. I want to get too excited about Swift right now. But also, as the organizer, or as someone who, my face appears in videos, folks recognize my face sometimes, I'm basically a known friend they can talk to. They did not come with a friend. They're by themselves. Oh, there's Paul. I've seen Paul videos. I've read his book or whatever. I want to go say hello to Paul. We've talked on Twitter or Slack or the forums where we've talked before. I'll go and chat to Paul. And it's brilliant because if I can make them feel comfortable, if I can make them feel welcome, even if they don't want to show off code, we can just chat about where they're from. I don't really mind. It's just nice. It's nice to hang out and talk to folks, and it gives them it makes the whole place feel a bit safer, I think. And as organizers, as an organizer in your case, you are a known quantity. Oh, that's Paola. She organized this thing. She made this thing happen. She's awesome. I'll go and talk to her, and they can immediately feel part of the group. It's just, and you're basically a safe person to speak to, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. And we definitely have new people at every meetup we organize, who will just come talk to myself or one of the other organizers and just ask questions about the group and like, the event where we are, no, the space where we are in the company, what we know. I'm always happy to talk to people who and like just like say hello and like know where they are in their journey. And so I think it's great. I love the experience of it.
Yeah. So another important part of your work in the community is mentoring people, actually looking after people specifically. Because it's very easy, you can get on stage at a big conference, deliver a talk to several hundred folks, round of applause, walk off, hooray, done. Anyone can do that, I think. A harder thing is to actually get alongside someone and say, we'll be working together for the next 3 months, 6 months, year or more, and help them grow to where they ought to be and where they want to be and help them reach their goals. And a common question folks have is, how can they find a mentor to help them learn Swift? What should they look for? How should they approach this in the first place?
Sometimes sometimes I'm lucky enough that like my manager or whoever's supervising me can be that mentor, but that's not always the case for people. I've definitely had people approach me just like via Twitter DMs and I had someone approach me to ask if I could mentor them. That was very direct. And in other cases, it happens just more as a conversation, like, hey, like, what do you know about this topic? And could you help me? And my main thing about mentorship is where it doesn't have to be this like super formal thing. I think sometimes I mentor people like informally, a lot more informally, just by, taking the time to have a call with them and sharing with them about my experience. And it's funny because I do this fairly often and I don't always remember. Like, I don't even remember where, like, I'll forget the conversation I had. But then people tend to follow up and say, like, hey, this is how I'm doing. I wanted to let you know, like, I got this job and I took your advice. And
Nice.
It's a fantastic feeling. So, like, even just, like, asking for a call for somebody, a request for, like, just, like, an informational call is something. There are situations where you might want, like, more, like, ongoing help. And I've definitely done that. Being conscious, being like considerate of people's time limitations and whatever, maybe just like see what they're able to do, able to offer you. And, whatever that is, maybe it's just like once a month, once a week or whatever. I had this for a while, as like an ongoing weekly call for an hour where I'd just do like a video chat with someone. Now that I'm in Philadelphia, I didn't know anyone out here. So I was doing a remote one over Skype or whatever tool works that day, to like screen share and like work through a problem and like not just work through a problem as in like I'm not trying to fix your code, but basically like help you understand enough how to fix it on your own.
Right.
That's been. I like doing it. I feel like a lot of people probably get approached a lot and like don't have the time to help out as much. I've heard that end of it as well. But yeah, like just like, try reaching out over whatever means, like maybe if they have a website, whatever. And that's, I've not done it personally, but I have reached out to a specific person wanting to learn more about like where they work and like what it's like being this specific in this role, perhaps. That maybe I'm interested in pursuing, just like informational calls and start there. And maybe they have more time in the future. Maybe they're willing to set up a call for something else or do something more ongoing. But I don't know if you have any other advice, Paul.
Well, I think the idea of just asking folks, can I get your coffee? Let's go out and chat about Swift, is a real core one that gets overlooked so easily. And I remember seeing, was that a Twitter thread? No, was it Reddit perhaps? Someone talking about this, saying, I want to do this. I want to ask folks, hey, I'll get your coffee. Let's talk about something or other, my job prospects. But I don't like coffee. What do I do? And I'm like, well, it's not necessarily, you don't necessarily have to go there and literally drink lattes together. You can have tea. You can have sparkling water. The coffee isn't the point. The point is it's a completely mundane place to go in public where you can just chat with someone in a safe, friendly way at a known quantity and just walk away. And it's very easy to do, and I do a heck of a lot of it. During Dub week, normally if I actually were there, a quarter of my time or so is spent in actual talks. I'm meeting people I'm supposed to meet at certain times. So Bay Area friends, whatever, at certain times. A quarter or so of the time I'm in labs trying to talk to engineers, getting answers. The only half the time is just free floating time. People say, "Oh, can I get you coffee and ask about so and so, or show you my code?" And I end up, of course, massively hyper caffeinated. I've had so much coffee and snacks and whatever for the week. I come back 3 stones heavier, or whatever you are, 50 pounds heavier. And that's a problem, but I try and make time for it because it's there. That's what I'm there for, to meet folks, to hang out, to get ideas and see other folks code and see what they're doing and get ideas from them. And, I don't have these ideas by myself. I see their ideas and give them feedback, and then I use ideas somewhere else. And it's a big system, People get as much from giving advice as they do from the other way around. So I think one of my dogs has recognized I'm talking on a podcast. Do you want treats? The simple "can I get you a coffee" and chat would be is a very, very sensible, good way to get started. Good dog. Yes, that's a great idea, and the more folks do it, what are you going to get? You're getting "no, I'm busy," or "no, I'm already mentoring lots of folks." That's kind of the worst you're going to get. I mean, there's not a great deal to lose in that respect. Right, you can have one more. Come on.
And you can be mentored by somebody who maybe works on a different platform entirely. Maybe somebody who does more web development, but who can maybe mentor you on maybe not specifically on Swift or iOS, but can mentor you on like how they got to their particular role, or how they got into management or whatever. There are people can be mentors in your life in all different ways. There are two.
Don't underestimate that, folks. Seriously, people seem to think that having a well-known Swift developer as mentor is some sort of trophy or whatever. I get that, but often for your career, what you need is not just more coding. You need interview skills, or you need interpersonal skills, or you want to do better with promotion, or you want to do better with business, or whatever it is, something else that's not just coding. So it's entirely possible, and honestly, personally, I would recommend it, that you go for a coding mentor and also an entirely non-coding mentor. And it might be, as Paola said, someone who does Kotlin, who won't give you Swift advice. That's fine too. But also it could be someone who doesn't do coding at all. They just want to do business or finance or marketing, and you can learn so much from them. And they're just as willing to teach and explain and guide and help as anyone else. So it's very, very highly recommended. Having these two-pronged mentor approach is a really, really big deal.
I agree.
So I think we're done. I'll wrap up now because I've already taken up enough of your time, Paola. Thank you so much for joining us. Where can folks find you on the internet?
So I'm on Twitter a lot. If that's your drug of choice, my handle is at Paola, not Paolo. I'm sure I'll share it somehow.
Your audio has gone. Cool. We were so close with no problems there at all, and the audio went. Okay, I'll fill in while she's fussing with audio. She is Paola, not Paolo, presumably because folks get that wrong a great deal, sadly, despite her saying it many, many times. But you all now know. I'll put it into the show notes for this episode on YouTube. You can go and follow her on Twitter. She has a blog, but you can, again, find her all on Twitter. I want to thank Bitrise again for sponsoring the show. They make it super easy to do CI and CD and signing and way, way more through their service. Go and check them out at bitrise.io. And if you enjoyed the show, if you enjoyed this podcast, you can find it on Apple Podcasts. You can subscribe on YouTube. You can set alerts, all that nice stuff, and listen to it again and again and again, and really dig in deep to answers from Kaya, John Sandell, Daniel Steinberg, and many more folks in previous shows. You'll find them all on Apple Podcasts, all on YouTube, on the stream. And until next time, folks, thanks a lot for coming. Take care.